this guy has written a great book, and they've just optioned the movie rights. So that tells you something about his book. Okay, so should we start, Joanna?
Of course.
Okay, so I don't see who is all there, but I think we have a number of people there, and has written a great book, and they've just optioned just tell you something about it. Say hello.
Is something happening with mine, or is that Penny?
Yeah. So somebody was maybe saying something. I don't know. Okay, but I'll say just a couple of words. I want to thank Joanna, who raised her hand. She's a library representative here, and she's been working with Jen to put together a number of programs. And there will be a program in August that I hope you will all come to. I think it's sort of part 2 of this. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. So this is more about wildlife, and then the one in August is more about food.
All right. So stay tuned for that. Jen Keller, some of you know, apparently some of you are already aware of Jen, but she's been a science educator for more than 15 years, and she currently teaches AP Environmental Science and Earth Science at Southampton High School. With an academic background in marine science and decades of fieldwork in the Long Island bioregion's ecosystems, Jen is currently a PhD student at Antioch University, where she is embarking on a project, and maybe this has changed in the pandemic era here, but where she's embarking on a project about the transformative and liberating potential of student-generated nature connection experiences. She integrates the historical, social, economic, and political environment in her classes with her students as they learn about how these topics integrate with the local natural environment and the interconnectedness of all systems that sustain life. Jen is at the end of a 4-year term as a New York State master teacher, working to develop teacher expertise in the areas of content, pedagogy, and student well-being. She also facilitates the Long Island Master Teacher Climate Change Professional Learning Team. She's passionate about empowering students and community members through knowledge and support. She's also a mindfulness instructor, permaculture designer, and a forest therapy guide. We are so lucky to have her in our community and have her as a person willing to share her knowledge and expertise with us. So Jen, thank you so much. We'll go ahead and get started. Thank you.
Thank you too, Penny. And thank you all for coming. It's really just great to see all your faces and people who are also passionate about caring for the earth and all her people. So before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge that both the library and the house I'm zooming from are on the traditional lands of the Shinnecock Nation, who have stewarded their land throughout the generations, and to pay my respect to Shinnecock elders, both past, present, and future. And so I am going to share my screen right now. I think I can do that. And are we all seeing the screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, and I'm just going to put this up here. All right. All right, so, you know what, I'm just going to minimize. Sorry, I'm talking to myself here. The title of the talk is on the library website is Converting Your Yard to a Certified Wildlife Habitat. But with everything that's happened over the last few weeks, I've sort of changed that a little bit to how inviting nature into your yard can heal the earth and her people. So we're at a unique time in history, and if we were all here 6 months ago, this talk would be like all of our lives, very different. So I'm sharing with you this Venn diagram from one of my teachers, Ava Dressel, because I found it a useful way to visualize what's happening right now. So there's the old earth over on the left with war, violence, environmental degradation, human exploitation, and homogenization. And on the right is a potential new earth filled with peace and solidarity, environmental regeneration, and social justice. And where we are right now is this messy, chaotic, some call it liminal place where the old and new are overlapping. And many of us have felt that sense of change for a while, though pretty much the entire globe understands this now. And between the pandemic, confronting systems of racism and oppression, and the tension between how the old earth is grasping to maintain its power and the momentum that's building to bring in something new that heals and liberates the earth and all her people. So our task is to leave this harmful past behind and to create a better future. And to do that, we must shift our paradigms and even our language. So for example, I became an adult with the rise of the sustainability paradigm, which is a paradigm touted by numerous visionaries and environmentalists. However, do we really want to sustain this ecological and social crisis that we're in right now? I say no. And I say that we need something that goes further. We need a paradigm that can evolve and adapt just as nature does. And this is a regenerative paradigm and one that can help us move toward a new earth that benefits all beings of the world. So my goal tonight is to inspire and empower you to do this important work in your yard. And to do that, I've broken this talk into 3 parts. First, I'll take you through several familiar environmental issues and show you the incredibly positive impact creating wildlife habitat in your yard will have on each of these. Then I'll put creating a patch of wildlife habitat into a larger context of many environmental and social issues at the forefront right now. And lastly, I'll take you through the steps to create a wildlife habitat in your yard and where you'll find more resources and get assistance. And after each of these sections, there'll be an opportunity for questions. And at the end, there'll be time for more questions and discussion. So we all know that nature is just about the best thing out there. And some of us have a bit or maybe even a whole bunch of semi-natural habitat already around our homes. So the question I have is, what else can we invite in? I can share a bit of my own experience in that what nature sends to me is often a surprise. And as you create habitat in your yard, you can be sure that you're also having a positive environmental impact. So it's no surprise, I'm sure, to anybody on this call right now that there are environmental crises happening right now, and there are 4 of them happening simultaneously. So there's climate change that's caused by many human activities, most notably burning fossil fuels. And fortunately, you can help reverse climate change by changing your landscape. Biodiversity loss is another tragic consequence of humans exploiting nature. We're in the midst of our planet's 6th mass extinction, but this time the mass extinction is caused by certain human practices. When you create wildlife habitat in your yard, you'll have a direct effect on improving biodiversity. And living on Long Island, we're no strangers to algal blooms and other issues caused by nutrient runoff. Just look at our bays in Lake Agawam. So creating wildlife habitat will reduce your yard's need for nutrient inputs. And lastly, toxins are harmful to us and to nature, and creating a certified wildlife habitat means that you're not using harmful toxins in your yard. So one of the most amazing things is that creating wildlife habitat will help reduce climate change. So let me explain how that happens. So climate change is caused by humans, mostly burning fossil fuels, but also our agricultural practices. And burning fossil fuels releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And plants take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere through the process of photosynthesis and make sugars out of it. And from these sugars, they build their plant bodies. And most of us have learned that the carbon then gets transferred around. The animals eat the plants, animals eat animals, and so on and so on. However, most of the sugar produced by plants actually goes down to their roots, to feed the microbes living in the soil. It's mostly bacteria and fungi, and they recycle organic material to support complex ecosystems. So plants take carbon out of the atmosphere and feed it to the soil, which traps or sequesters it underground for long periods of time. So plants are the feeding organs of the earth, taking in carbon dioxide, converting it to food, and then feeding that to other organisms in the soil as well as above ground. So healthy soil is teeming with life, bacteria, fungi, invertebrates, and this soil has tremendous carbon holding capacity, and it's also able to regenerate or create itself. So this is the kind of soil that's found in natural forest and grasslands in our area, as well as organic gardens that are filled with native plants. In contrast, unhealthy soil is not alive. Often the organisms have been killed by pesticides. Now, the other way that native plants support healthy soil is their root systems that fill up different depths, unlike turf grass with its really shallow roots. So in addition, native plants, they've co-evolved with those soil microbes. So they facilitate the health of those microbes and facilitate their ability to store carbon. So imagine what would happen if this conversion happened on a large scale. Imagine how we could help with climate change. An also wonderful benefit of creating wildlife habitat is that you'll be helping increase biodiversity. Clearly, a garden is more diverse than a monoculture lawn. And at first, the most obvious way that creating habitat increases biodiversity is the dramatic increase in the variety of plants. However, that switch also brings in many new animals like bees and butterflies that are attracted to the nectar, birds that are attracted to the berries and seeds and insects. So it can be really mesmerizing to see what happens when you invite a bit more of nature into your yard and see how that opens up new relationships between the living beings in your yard. Unseen, though, below ground is also an increase in biodiversity brought about because you're now providing more food and better habitat for the soil organisms. Although not as visible, this is probably the most important way that you're increasing biodiversity. Soil is the interface between terrestrial life and the earth, and increasing its capacity to regenerate itself increases its capacity to support life. Also important is how creating wildlife habitat will reduce nutrient pollution. So since we're all on Long Island, we're all familiar with toxic algal blooms. And of course, in the village, we have Lake Agawam, which is in a really unhealthy state, constantly under cyanobacteria warnings. So another beautiful thing about nature is that it doesn't need any fertilizer. It's not like the forest needs us to go out and spray Miracle-Gro or anything around. So all the nutrients in an ecosystem are cycled in that region. So creating a habitat of native plants means that area of your yard does not need any fertilizer. And native plants are adapted to lower nutrient soil. So even if your soil isn't that great, over time, it'll improve as your native plants will be feeding organisms in the soil to make more soil. And another type of wildlife habitat that I'd like to put in a plug for all of us, but especially anyone that's making a decision in the public works world, is rain gardens. And there's a picture of that over on the right. And they're a bit of habitat designed to absorb extra runoff and to reduce flooding. They capture pollution and nutrients and can improve water quality. So if we think of most areas that flood, they're paved surfaces or other areas that humans have extensively modified. And when they flood, the water has nowhere to go. So the typical solution is to put in a storm drain. For example, if you think of the road by the library, Windmill Lane, if you look at the topographic map on the left, you can see how that area slopes from north to south down to the lake. And on the east side of Windmill Lane, there used to be a wetland with an intermittent stream that flowed into what's now Lake Agawam. Now there's a road there, the river's underground in a pipe that has to be periodically cleaned out. But all that water still flows towards the lake. And all those plants that used to be there had important filtering and water absorption functions. So yes, Lake Agawam has algal blooms because of the septic and fertilizer, but also because we've removed part of the lake's ecosystem. We can add rain gardens anywhere we want to absorb extra water, a soggy spot in our yards, along the road, or a spot that frequently floods. And we can let nature do this job for us and decrease nutrient loading in our surface waters. And lastly, creating a wildlife habitat will eliminate the need for pesticides, which are harmful toxins. Just like with fertilizer, nature has no need for Roundup or Ortho Bug Be Gone. In nature, predator-prey relationships keep populations in check, and pesticides also kill the beneficial pollinators and soil organisms that keep your habitat alive and self-sustaining. Though probably more important to many of us is how eliminating these toxins is important for our health. All right, pesticides are harmful. Most have cancer-causing ingredients, and pesticides are particularly harmful to kids as their bodies are smaller and they're still developing. So eliminating toxins is yet another benefit of converting part of your yard to wildlife habitat. So once again, you have tremendous potential in your yard to have a positive environmental impact. So before we go any further, as I'm about to get into part 2 of my talk, I wanted to pause for any questions. So if you have a question, actually, let me just stop the share. So if you have a question, just unmute yourself, or you can type it in the chat. There'll also be time for questions later on and at the end. Okay, lots of great smiles. All right, that's wonderful. So I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. And
There's a question.
okay, so that's actually it's Barbara, or is it Barbara Ham? Oh, okay. So so I'm just quickly going to say that overall the best solution for vines is, or anything that you don't want, is to gently pull them out. But if I could save your question to the end, because I think other people are, now that you've typed that up, they're like, oh yeah, I have the same question. So do you mind if I wait till the end on that? All right, thanks so much. All right, so let me just go back to sharing my screen. And can you see the slideshow again?
Yes.
All right, that's awesome. So I'll just put my little notes back up here. Okay. Take that off. All right. Let's see, for some reason, oh, there we go. All right. All right. So, so I'm going to move on to part 2, because in addition to this positive environmental impact that you'll have when you invite more native plants into your yard, you'll also be changing long-held harmful paradigms. So I just want to take a minute to explain what I mean by that. All right, so creating wildlife habitat creates other positive changes in several ways. And one of the reasons for that is that environmental and cultural repair are linked, in that doing one will facilitate the other. So let me explain that a bit further and unpack it just a little bit more for you. So, so the reason that I'm talking about paradigms is that changing paradigms is one of the most powerful ways to change a system. So this is a diagram. It's modified from Donella Meadows illustrating this. And she calls interventions leverage points. And I hope that you can see that this is a diagram showing a lever, a fulcrum, and the earth that we're trying to lift up and make better. So ways we can act can be compared to a location on a lever. Now, all of us recognize the need to change a lot about our world right now and wonder where we can best put our energy to make the world a better place. So if you think of the kinds of actions we can do to make change, some are closer to the fulcrum, and these tend to be easier to do, and also where most of our human, social, and environmental action tend to fall. These are things like laws, incentives, land preservation, and all of these have a positive effect, but do not have the power to shift the system as much as leverage points further out on the lever. So these points are harder to implement. These are things like the rules of the system, the fundamental ways the system is organized, or the goal of the system. And the most powerful leverage points are related to paradigms and paradigm shifts. And sometimes paradigms are called worldviews or frameworks, and they frame our ways of thinking and methods of investigating and relating to the world. So changing paradigms has the greatest potential for positive change, but it takes the most effort. Paradigms or worldviews influence the way everything below it is approached. And when we shift our worldview to be less human-centered, we will not only repair the environment, we can also start to repair the rift between people as well. So as environmental repair and cultural repair are linked, doing one will facilitate the other. And this is at least partly seen in people working for environmental justice, but it's also seen in other places, including permaculture, the forest therapy movement, the global indigenous land movement. So inviting nature into your yard will open up new connections with the land and with other people. Now, before I go on to the next slide, which will seem to trash talk lawns, I want to be clear that I don't hate lawns. Like, where else would my kids play badminton or soccer, or what better place to have a picnic? But I do want to highlight some issues with them and why, for more than environmental reasons, we need to shift our concept of a beautiful yard. So lawns as we know them originated in Europe. And even the grasses that make up our lawns, including Kentucky bluegrass, are European imports. So this is a colonial landscape, and it's an oppressive landscape even back in Europe, where it was a symbol of status. So a lawn requires taming or dominating or killing nature to maintain. And it required tremendous amounts of human labor to maintain. And in the US, that was usually enslaved Black people. And even now, after the invention of the lawnmower, a lawn requires a tremendous amount of energy to maintain. Now we use fossil fuels. And just as an aside, lawn covers more US acreage and uses more fertilizer than food crops. So we create this monoculture aesthetic where any plant that's different stands out and must be removed. Anytime nature tries to push back into the lawn, nature is easy to identify and pull out or kill with poison. And this is similar to the structure of many of our communities. They are homogeneous monocultures where people who look or think differently are perceived as not belonging. The way that we treat our yards and nature is a reflection of how some of us treat each other. So for millennia, people in what is now called North America had a respectful, caring, and cooperative relationship with the land. Indigenous North Americans worked in partnerships with the land to create a resilient landscape that allowed all beings to flourish. Fickret Burks, in his book Sacred Ecology, compares traditional ecological knowledge to Western science. And he says, traditional ecological knowledge addresses human-environment relationships in a holistic, ethic, and humanistic way that leads to stewardship and the evolution of landscapes that are diverse, resilient, and adaptable. Sounds pretty good. And then about half a millennia ago, Europeans came to this continent. And at this point, Europe was mostly deforested. So when settlers arrived, they were like, oh my God, the trees. And they didn't understand that the woodlands and savannas that they were observing were the result of thousands of years of humans and nature working together. And of course, European settlers proceeded to deforest much of the continent and to clear lands for crops and livestock. The forest was a resource, the soil was a resource, and the resources were useful only as long as they were productive. European settlers extracted resources, ignoring the needs of nature, propped up their systems first with the input of labor, often of enslaved people, and now our industrial agricultural system uses fossil fuels to prop up a fragile system that's in its place. Again, the way people relate to the land is a reflection of how they relate to people. People can be cared for in respectful relationships, or people can be looked at as resources that must be productive to be valuable. This is why environmental and cultural repair are so linked, and why when you invite nature into your yard, it can have an effect beyond your home. So I just had to share this colonial dude with you. He popped up in my Facebook feed last Wednesday, and I just had to include it because it helps explain why we keep enormous lawns and use terminology like trophy lawns, even though we know it's harmful to the earth and to us. Right? A lawn continues to be a signal that we're part of the dominant class, and a homeowner's conformity to this harmful practice gives them status. So I wonder, could we disrupt this paradigm of oppression? What would happen if instead of nature being the enemy of our lawns, we partnered with nature in our gardens? What if we invited nature back into our yards and see what nature had to say to us? Could we develop more of a sense of place that allows more expression than just our human expression? So when you make that change, you're changing the aesthetic and saying, this is what I value. I value nature and I value diversity. Just imagine if that paradigm swept our community and neighborhoods. I have been spending a lot of time lately walking around my neighborhood and noticing the huge potential each house has. And I wonder what it would be like if I were walking past endless habitat in my neighbors' yards, meadows, prairie, forest, rain gardens, how that would feel so different from endless lawn and privet. And so before we go any further, I wanted to pause again for questions. And before I get into the third part of the talk, where I get into like the how-to of creating wildlife habitat and inviting nature into your yard. So if you have questions, if you want to unmute yourself, and if you have something to share, now would kind of be a fun time to do that. Did people bring something to share from their gardens? Yeah, some people?
Yes.
I
Yeah.
have a question.
Yes.
How do you keep the weeds from taking over if you want to?
Right.
That's my concern.
Right. That's always the question. And you know, the beginning part of the process, it's interesting because, you know, there are a lot of weeds there, and some of them are things that people call invasive weeds, like garlic mustard or mile-a-minute vine. And those are things that like you don't want them at any cost. Like you just want to be aggressive and pulling them out, because not only can they just like cover everything, the birds love them, and then they spread their seeds to other places. So totally that's something that you would want to like rip out in, you know, I would say even an aggressive way. But there are other plants that I think maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, I might have called weeds. And I was up at my uncle's biodynamic farm on the North Fork, and he had those weeds there too. And I'm like, what's up with that? And he's like, yeah, you know, I kind of noticed that if I let them go, they act as a ground cover and nothing else grows up. So, some of the plants that nature sent to me that aren't things like garlic mustard or mile a minute vine, I've let them occupy niches in my yard, and now they're suppressing other weeds. So I have things like wild strawberry. I have even chickweed, which I know a lot of us are just like, oh, you know, it's like they grow and nothing else grows. So it's just sort of formed a low ground cover under some of my shrubs. So it's really been kind of reframing what I think of as weeds and being very judicious in what I decide I'm like, okay, no way. And being curious, like, okay, what happens with this if it keeps going?
Okay, there's another question in the
Yeah.
bathroom.
Okay. Lawn tractors. I know. Yeah. So, so the question from Dorothy is relating to exhaust from lawnmowers. So a lot of lawn equipment, I think they're called two-stroke engines, and they emit a lot of carbon dioxide. They emit a lot of particulates, and so they are very environmentally degrading. So minimizing the amount of lawn that needs to be mowed, that's another way that you're helping with climate change and air pollution, is using that less. So thanks for that comment, Dorothy. Anybody else have a question? All right, so what I was thinking is that I could put everybody into breakout rooms and you could share, but a bunch of people, I don't know if they have their things. So I don't necessarily want to do this activity unless people have things to share, because we can just move on.
All right.
Just raise your hand if you brought a little something from your garden. Oh, okay. So you know what? I think we're gonna skip the activity unless so Barbara,
I'm kidding. It's
no,
fine.
okay, because you could share it with
That's fine.
okay. All right. All right. So let me just rearrange myself here again. Sorry, my my notes thing got locked up. All right, so now we get into the how-to. And just based on the questions I've gotten so far, I have a feeling that we're going to get the most questions after this part, which is totally fine. So how do you do it? How do you create a wildlife habitat in your yard? So there are 3 major certification organizations, and they all require the same 5 elements to certify your yard. So I'm going to briefly take you through each of them. It's food, water, cover, places to raise young, and sustainable practices, which mostly means going organic. And at the end, I'll share the certification organizations and how they vary. And the process for all of them is a type of self-certification, in that you evaluate your own yard and then pay a fee to obtain the certification. So you can do all of this without getting certified. But there are some benefits to that I'll explain more towards the end. Hold on, it's not, there we go. All right, so so everything needs food, and you can think of each plant in your landscape as a potential bird feeder. Either it has food or it doesn't. Native plants form the foundation of the food chain in the natural world. So they're an important part of your landscape. Yards that have a lot of non-native plants create food deserts for insects and birds. So native plants provide food for wildlife in a variety of ways. We have berries, seeds, nuts, nectar for the insects, and then the birds, of course, like to eat the insects. And so native plants are going to support complex and resilient food webs. So it's almost like you are setting up an ecosystem in your yard and thinking about what it needs. Native plants also more easily form associations with soil fungi and bacteria, and that nurtures the complex soil food webs that support our gardens. Another way to provide food for wildlife is to delay deadheading and cleanup till spring. And this will provide a winter food source for the wildlife that stays in your yard over winter. You can also place fallen branches or logs in the back of your garden behind shrubs to encourage grubs and insects that birds and salamanders and other wildlife rely on. So how cool would that be to get salamanders in your yard? And although nature doesn't need humans to put out feeders, I put a picture of one here, as having a bird feeder can count as a food source for the certification process. So just like water, all wildlife needs clean drinking water, and birds also need water to bathe to keep their feathers in good working order. And other species like amphibians and insects actually live in the water. So you can provide this in a variety of ways. And if you live near a pond or river or a bay or marsh, and you can see it from your yard, you have that water requirement covered. However, if you don't live near the water, you can provide water as a bird bath, a shallow dish of water, or you could even go larger and make a water garden. You could even create a backyard bog or marsh or a rain garden in a soggy area of your yard. Wildlife also needs places to find shelter from weather extremes. They need places to hide from predators, and predators themselves need cover to successfully capture their prey. So wildlife just needs cover to feel safe. And native vegetation is the perfect cover for terrestrial wildlife, right? And the first picture shows leaves, and that's because fallen leaves, woody debris are such an important habitat layer. They can also serve as a natural mulch and provide habitat for insects and salamanders and other organisms. However, I know for a lot of us, leaving our leaves all over our yards could be a hard lift. So just place them under trees and shrubs where they can slowly decompose, providing nutrients and habitat. So it's like a win-win with all those fall leaves. Even dead trees provide cover and are home to lots of different animals, including some that use tree cavities and branches for nesting and perching. When a tree dies, instead of removing the whole tree, we can just remove the dangerous upper branches and leave the trunk. And what that creates is a snag in our yards that gets filled with insects that birds like to eat and make homes in. And if natural options aren't available for you, you can build a birdhouse or a bat house or an insect hotel specifically for whatever types of animals you want to attract to your habitat. And wildlife also needs a place to raise their young. And so how great to not just have adult birds and insects, but also get to enjoy all those life phases. And I'm just thinking of all the little baby birds and watching a monarch chrysalis for the butterfly to emerge. And some species like amphibians and butterflies have totally different habitat needs in their juvenile phase than they do as adults. So it's important to offer habitat in all phases of the life cycle. And many places for cover can double as locations for where wildlife raise their young. So you can have a wildflower meadow, bushes where butterflies and moths lay their eggs, snags where birds can make their homes. So sometimes one can cover 2 requirements for the certification process. And then lastly, for a wildlife habitat, it's also critical to use regenerative practices in your yard. Remember that nature does not need any chemical interventions. So maintaining your landscape in an organic, environmentally friendly way ensures that the soil, air, and water that native wildlife and us rely on stay clean and healthy. So what does that mean? That means soil and water conservation like composting, xeriscaping, which is water-wise landscaping, reducing erosion, using mulch like leaves, or making rain gardens. Also removing non-native or opportunistic non-native plants and animals, using native plants, and reducing our lawn areas. And thirdly is using organic practices, eliminating chemical pesticides, eliminating chemical fertilizers, and composting. We don't want to be killing the very organisms that we're trying to attract to our yard. So as gardeners and homeowners, and maybe even landscape managers, we're uniquely positioned to make a huge positive impact in supporting pollinators and other wildlife in our landscapes. And we can directly make changes to our backyards, our parks, our community gardens, and we can work with our neighbors and community leaders to create more habitat and adopt pollinator and wildlife friendly practices. So there's something about letting others know what you're doing that can create an even larger shift. So much of what we do as people, we either do out of habit or because it's the norm in our community or culture. The norm in many of our communities is to spray, and by law, pesticide applicators need to put these little plastic signs up to warn people to stay away because toxic chemicals were applied, and we just accept this. Announcing your commitment and showcasing your certification is a subtle but direct way to shift the perception of what is normal. What if instead of lots of little yellow plastic signs, we saw lots of certified habitat signs? What if instead of trophy lawns, we had trophy pollinator gardens or trophy rain gardens or monarch refuges? So once you have all those 5 requirements fulfilled, you can go to any or all of these organizations to obtain your certification. So you can go to the National Wildlife Federation, which is really what I based most of these instructions off of. It has a really useful and easy to follow certification process, very accessible website, beautiful magazine. And they sell this sign. So there's a certification process, but they also sell the sign that's in this picture, and you can even get your house number on it. So, that's a way to promote your wildlife habitat. If you're particularly focused on birds, maybe you want to certify through the Audubon Society, right? They have their Plants for Birds program. And then if you're particularly excited about creating pollinator habitat, you might want to check out the Xerces Society. They're focused on invertebrate conservation. You can obtain certification from all 3, which can be kind of fun if you're creating small areas in your yard. Excuse me. You could place signage on each, design one at a time. And what's neat about going through this whole process is that it's a lot of wonderful learning. And it also enables you to do a lot for the earth. So going back to where we started. So it's true we're at an inflection point where the need for action has never been more obvious. By inviting nature into your yard, allowing nature to have a voice in your hope, you'll be helping transition to the new earth that we want. So I'm a fan of quotes, and before we wrap things up, I want to share 2 with you. One is the words of Horace Mann, a fierce educator an abolitionist, and the first president of the Antioch University, where I am working on my doctorate. Be ashamed to die until you have won some victory for humanity. I see these words every time I walk in the front doors of Antioch. And every time I read this, it moves me, as that's my drive and passion, to make the world a better place for all Earth's beings. The other quote is from Martin Luther King Jr., whose words always ring true and align with the urgency we feel now. Faith is taking the first step, even if you don't see the whole staircase. This is true on so many levels. So much is uncertain, and yet we know what to do to make the world a better place. One is healing our relationship with the land, and another is healing our relationship with each other. You might not know how it will turn out, but you know how to take that first step and see what good things happen. Thank you so much for the gift of your time and attention.
That was great. Thank you, Jennifer.
Oh,
That
thanks.
was great.
So did I stop sharing? Okay. So any questions, comments?
I have just a comment. I think it's the first step that is so difficult to take. It's where do I begin?
Yeah.
I'd love to see a meadow outside my window.
Yeah.
How would you suggest to start? Just in the corner of your yard?
Yeah, so that's such a great question. And I meant to even bring that up, is that there's this website called 10% Happier. And I think, what if we just did 10% of our yards? If everybody made things 10% better, and started there and allowed it to expand. So, for I can only speak for myself. It just started in a small patch, and then it's grown to really take up pretty much my whole yard. And those of you who come in August, hopefully I'll actually be able to take you around and you'll be able to see some of the stuff that I've done. But I would suggest start with a small area and think about what you want to attract. Is it pollinators? Is it birds? Just wildlife in general, increasing biodiversity. But anytime you're replacing your lawn with even just a little bit of native habitat, it's like a total home run for nature.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Hey, Jen, this
Hey,
is
Doug.
Doug McGuire. Hi, how are you?
How are you?
Good, thanks. Thanks very much for that presentation. That was really good, very inspiring. And I'm wondering, those of us who live here or close to Southampton, we have a very important indigenous group who lives right here, and you referred to the Shinnecock
Right.
at the very beginning. And I'm just wondering, because indigenous peoples all over the world, have remained in many cases connected to the land.
Yeah.
They have a rapport with nature that I think we need to start to understand more fully. And I'm just wondering, because I'm new to this area, what your thoughts would be about learning or taking advantage of what the Shinnecock have practiced historically. And I think in many ways, from what I understand from the few Shinnecock I've spoken with, are sort of trying to get back to some of the things that they've lost in their culture. And so I'm just wondering your thoughts of how that really bears on a lot of the things that you mentioned this evening.
Yeah. So there's a lot to in that question. And so, I look at the Shinnecock Nation and how they've stewarded their land, and I look at the environmental quality. And if you just do a simple compare and contrast between the Shinnecock Nation and Southampton Village, like, you can't even compare that. So they've been sustaining and stewarding their lands, both the area in the village and in the Hampton Bays area, in a way that's been cooperative with nature. You know, their historical record is forever. So, I think there's a tremendous amount to learn from their relationship with the land, because they have a land culture. And so the way that they're relating to nature, it's not something separate. It's something that's part of the family. And so it's always looking at not just what I need from nature, but what we all need as a community. So Southampton, and I'm talking about Southampton like the village, we think of ourselves as a large community, but the way that Shinnecock colleagues have explained it to me, their community is all the beings that are on their land. So assigning whether it's sentience or consciousness, I mean, there are all different ways to think about it, but looking at non-human life as a part of maintaining the whole world and having a role is an essential part in going forward as humanity.
Great, thank you.
Okay, there's a two questions about tick control.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, that's really one of the toughest ones, right? Because I know for a lot of people, it's like, yeah, but the ticks, because we're talking about human health and the health of our children. And so I can share some of the strategies that I use in my yard. I have a no spray yard. One is that I try to keep ticks off myself. So I'm thinking like, okay, so what's really the issue here? Is it ticks in the yard or is it ticks on me? So I think of it as ticks on me. So when I'm gardening, you know, I've got socks on, I'm doing the whole tick protocol. My socks are tucked into my pants. I've got long sleeves on, light color. So just like I go for a hike, I'm covered up in my yard when I'm gardening. But the other thing that I have found incredibly effective, and I really resisted this for a very long time, were the tick tubes, which are filled with the permethrin, the chrysanthemum extract. So I set those out twice a year in August and in the spring. And then the mice that live in my yard, they use that to make their nests, and it kills all the ticks. That because really mice in our area are the major vector. Like it's deer, but it's also mice. So it's really controlling the vector of the ticks. So in addition to really making sure that like they're not getting on me, over the past couple of years, I've really reduced the number of ticks in my yard just by putting those tick tubes out. So that's another strategy. I know people who live adjacent to woodlands, and then they have enough space, they put up a boundary of mulch, you know, which is a look, but apparently it works. It creates a barrier between the forest and the yard. So ticks are tough. And I always do a tick check, you know, every night. Yeah, we've really, we've changed the ecology of our area. And that is something that I think is one of the most concerning things.
I use cider oil. Cider?
Oh, so how do you use that?
You buy it in a container, attach it to your water hose, and spray your yard.
So
it really works. I have cats. They bring so many ticks.
yeah.
And you have to do it, I think, twice in 2 weeks, and then every 8 weeks.
Oh, cedar oil. Yes. Yes. Oh, yeah. And it probably smells great.
It smells amazing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yep. I don't know if anybody else has used any of those other organic type of sprays.
No.
Now, Joanna, do you do that once, or do you just like do it every week? How often do you do that?
At the beginning, you have to do it twice, I think, in 2 weeks period, and then
Yeah.
every 8 weeks. So it's not, and you water your lawn, so that's another benefit. And
Yeah.
you're pushing the flowers around.
Right. So cedar oil is another one.
That's good.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions?
I just want to say hi again. This is Laura Weaver. You spoke on the phone like last year about your forest farm coming to visit.
Hey, Laura, I'm having a hard time hearing you.
You spoke on the phone like a year ago. Jay gave me your number.
Oh, right.
And then COVID happened and all that.
Yep.
I'm all on board with this. I mean, a paradigm shift for sure, at least the way I'm doing it, which is totally by the seat of my pants, kind of thing. It's not Hamptons, it's not a finished garden.
Yeah.
It's always a work in progress. And
Yeah.
I actually collect my neighbor's leaves, and I ask the tree guys to dump a truckload of their chips on my front next to my driveway, and I spend. I have people who help me, but I spend a lot of time using that and letting it kind of break down and use it in the garden, and some areas that do have just a ton of that, the vines and all that. I get cardboard, bicycle
Yeah.
box.
Cardboard is an amazing sheet mulch.
Right.
And it just feeds the soil, right?
Or if I run out of chips, I get the leaves.
Yeah.
So I mean, it is really interesting, and
Yeah.
see what happens. And the nice thing is, once you plant a couple of the natives, then you collect the seeds,
Yeah.
or the birds and everyone else does it for you, and then you have so many volunteers. And to just say, I always have a ton of native plant seeds in the fall. I'm always happy to share them with people. This year I just, went and tossed them around, and I actually tossed them at the Southampton post office. So,
Laura, you're saying you have so many seeds. I wonder if we could do like some sort of seed swap in the fall at the library.
We have a library, so if you are collecting seeds, we take them. And
so
then
you have a seed library at the library?
Yes.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
Wow.
And Laura, you mentioned something about how it's like, it's not like a kept yard. And it's just interesting how it's like, and it sounded like it started kind of small, but then it expanded. And it's like, just, I don't know if you found like your own perception of what you wanted really changed over time. What you started out with was different. I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but
I bought the house. It had a front yard. In the front yard, I planted some native stuff, and then I'm so busy with the back, I don't even tend to the front yard anymore. I've taken out most of the lawn, and now, what is it, the oak grass, and a ton of butterfly weed, and the rose campion, which some people consider weed. Anyway, so I know how to take care of it, but it's pretty, I think, in a natural way. You know? And the back, again, I mean, a lot of people wouldn't like how it looks, but
Yeah, you know what though? That's like part of that paradigm shift is like, you know, just because it's not what people are valuing now doesn't mean that 5 or 10 years from now, that's not what people are going to value.
But it's
And-
amazing to see,
yeah.
you know, goldfinches
Yeah.
not at my bird feeder, but they're on the rudbeckia, or they're on the echinacea even, so which they're supposed to.
Yeah.
You know, and I mean, I even have some hawks, and I, you know, sad to say, it's a tough life out there, but you know, I think it was probably a rabbit or a bunny who got caught, and I came upon fur and little tiny jaw, and
Yeah.
but, I mean, that's, you know.
Sounds great. Sounds endlessly fascinating.
Yeah, it is endlessly fascinating. And I also look around, I walk around my neighborhood and I'm like, oh.
Yes, I know. And, you know, I think that that's one of the bigger shifts that happens is that you see all the potential in the lawns that everybody has. And you're just like, oh my God, you know, that there could be so much there. It's like you really, it's a big mind shift. I don't know if anyone else has started to already go on this journey of inviting more nature into your yard or thinking about it and would want to share their experience. And I also want to respect everyone's time because I also see that we're at the end. I didn't even realize we went over with that. Oh, Dorothy says she's making a new yard. That's great. Wonderful. So, Joanna, you had said that you would post that presentation on, do you post these?
Yes.
For people? Because there are the links to all those organizations.
Okay.
And then at the end, there's also all the references that I used to put this together in case anybody's curious.
Mm-hmm. So the video will be on YouTube, and then you send me your presentation, so I'll share it with everyone who was here today. Plus, I will maybe have a link available on YouTube as well.
Okay, great.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jen.
Yeah, my pleasure. And you know what? I just want to say something to Doug because he had mentioned about Indigenous knowledge. The book you want to get for that, it's on the references, is the Sacred Ecology book. Because he dwells, the author dwells in both worlds, the Western science and the traditional ecological knowledge. Yeah, so that's